3 in the morning has its own grammar. Sentences do not finish the same way they do in daylight. Thoughts do not travel in straight lines. The ordinary architecture of how a person presents themselves to the world, to other people, to themselves even, loses its structural integrity somewhere around the second or third hour of lying awake, and what remains underneath it is something considerably more honest than what walks around in the light of day. They are in that grammar right now, whoever this is for you, whatever the specific history, the particular shape of what exists or existed or has been unresolved between you. This person is awake in the hours when the careful version of themselves has finally run out of the resources required to stay careful. And in that unguarded, sleepless 3 in the morning state, something is becoming unavoidable that has been, until now, possible to avoid. The truth of what they feel and what they owe you. Before we go into that fully, I want to take a moment here with the people who have made this channel what it is. I have been sitting with the comments from the last few readings, and there is something happening in them that I want to acknowledge out loud. People have been sharing not just reactions, but processes, the actual movement of things in their lives, updates, real ones, the kind that tell me this work is landing somewhere useful rather than simply somewhere comfortable. That matters to me more than most things. To everyone who comes back, who trusts this space with the real texture of what they are living, thank you. Your willingness to be honest here makes the readings more honest in return. There is a reciprocity to this work that I do not think gets named enough. And to whoever found this today for the first time, welcome into something genuine. Stay. Now let us get into what the cards opened with, because it has been sitting in my chest since the beginning of this session, and it is time to give it the room it needs. The first impression that arrived was not visual. It was auditory, which is unusual for me. I tend to receive images first, scenes, colors sometimes, spatial relationships between elements in the spread. But this opened with a sound, the specific sound of a house at night. Not silence exactly, because true silence does not really exist in a house where a person is awake and restless. The particular acoustic of someone turning over in bed, the specific creak of a person who has been lying in one position for too long, finally shifting because the position has become unbearable. Small sounds, the kind that only exist because someone is awake who was supposed to be sleeping. That is where this reading begins, in someone else's sleeplessness. And before I say anything else about what that sleeplessness contains, I want to say something about what it means structurally. Because the fact of being unable to sleep is itself significant information, regardless of the content of the thoughts that are causing it. Sleep requires a particular kind of internal permission, a laying down not just of the body, but of whatever has been unresolved enough to require active mental holding. You cannot sleep while you are actively managing something, while there is something that needs to be said that has not been said. While the gap between what a person knows to be true and what they have been behaving as though is true has become wide enough that the gap itself generates a kind of low-level alarm that the sleeping brain cannot ignore. This person is not sleeping because something in them will not grant the permission, because something knows the ledger is unbalanced. And the sleeping brain, which is considerably more honest than the waking social brain, is refusing to close until the imbalance is acknowledged. Let me get specific about what the imbalance actually consists of. because I think you deserve that level of precision rather than a general reading about someone feeling guilty or confused. There is a version of events of the history between you that this person has been sustaining, not a fabrication exactly, more like a carefully edited presentation of the truth that leaves certain things out, certain moments, certain choices, certain times when they knew they were not showing up in the way the situation deserved and proceeded anyway, perhaps because it was easier, perhaps because the cost of honesty felt too high at the time, perhaps because some combination of their own fear and their own want produced behavior that they have never fully accounted for. And the accounting is coming due, not because of anything you have done or said, not because circumstances have forced a reckoning from outside, but because this person has arrived through the accumulation of sleepless hours and the particular honesty of the 3 a.m. grammar I described at the beginning, at a point where sustaining the edited version has become more exhausting than the prospect of setting it down. The edited version requires maintenance, and they are tired. So specifically, so deeply tired of the maintenance that what previously seemed like an unacceptably vulnerable thing to do, which is to simply tell you the truth about what happened and what they felt and what they chose and why, has begun to seem less frightening than one more night of lying awake holding the weight of the untold version. Something just shifted in what I am reading, and I want to follow it because it is pulling me away from where I was heading. And experience has taught me that these pulls are usually the most important part of a reading. There is something underneath the guilt and the sleeplessness that I have not addressed yet. Something softer than guilt, more complicated than regret. Let me sit with it. Love is a word I use carefully in readings because it is too large and too loosely applied to be useful most of the time. But what I am perceiving here requires it, not as a soft, decorative word. In its most inconvenient, most disruptive, most physiologically real sense, this person is awake because of what they feel for you, not just because of what they did or did not do, not primarily from guilt or the moral discomfort of an unbalanced ledger. Underneath all of that, generating the sleeplessness from a place deeper than conscience is the feeling itself. The specific unmanageable will not be reasoned with quality of genuine feeling for another person that makes sleep impossible, not because of what you owe them, but because of how present they are in you, how completely they occupy the interior space of your night hours, how every attempt to drift toward unconsciousness brings you back to them, to the specific gravity of what they mean, in a way that the sleeping brain simply cannot navigate around. They are not just awake because they owe you honesty. They are awake because you are in them fully, in a way that has not diminished with distance or time or the edited version they have been sustaining. If anything, the editing has made the feeling more present, because every time a person suppresses the truth of something they feel, the suppressed thing tends to intensify in the compressed space rather than dissipate. What has been compressed in this person is considerable, and it is pressing hard against the inside of whatever container they have been keeping it in. I want to speak to you directly for a moment and step away from the reading of their interior state, because there is something in your field that I noticed at the beginning and have been holding in my peripheral attention, and I think it is time to bring it to the center. You have been managing your own knowing about this very similarly in structure, if not in content, to how they have been managing theirs. You have known things about this person, about the situation, about what was real and what was performed, and where the gaps were between the two. And you have made, with considerable sophistication and considerable personal cost, a series of decisions about how much of that knowing to act on, how much to acknowledge, how much to let alter your behavior toward them versus how much to absorb quietly without giving any outward indication of having registered it. Your version of the 3 a.m. grammar has its own content, its own sleepless hours, its own inventory of things you have perceived and held and not yet done anything definitive with. And what the reading is showing me is not that one of you is the honest one and the other is not. It is that both of you have been carrying privately carried truths that have been waiting for the conditions to be right for them to be spoken. The conditions are becoming right, not because anything dramatic has happened, because the accumulation of carrying it privately has simply reached the natural limit of what can be sustained before the weight of the unsaid begins to cost more than the risk of saying it. For both of you, let me talk about what honesty actually looks like when it arrives in a situation like this one, because I think the word itself can carry misleading implications about what the experience of receiving it will be like. Honesty in this context is not going to arrive as a clean, organized, fully coherent accounting of everything that was complicated. That is not how truth speaks after a long period of compression. It is going to arrive partially, haltingly, in the specific, imperfect, reaching quality of something that has been held for a long time, being released in conditions that are emotionally pressured, things said in the wrong order, important things buried inside less important things, the most significant admission possibly arriving sideways, embedded in something that sounds almost casual because the direct approach to it still feels too exposed. I want you to know this in advance so that when it arrives in this form, which it likely will, you do not read the imperfection of the delivery as evidence that the content is not genuine. The imperfection is evidence of how long it has been held. Things compressed for a long time do not emerge in tidy forms. They emerge the way they can, in the shape the moment allows. Your job, and I use that word deliberately because it does require something active from you, is to hear past the form toward the content, to hold enough space in the conversation for something that cannot come out smoothly to come out anyway. That is not a small thing to ask of you, particularly given what it has cost you to carry your own version of the unsaid through whatever this period has contained. But the reading is showing me that you are capable of it, more than capable. Something is coming through now about a specific moment, a threshold moment in the near arc of this situation, and I want to describe what I am perceiving around it without overstating what I can actually see. There is a reaching, an actual, literal, physical reaching in the form of contact, a message or a call or an appearance, something that breaks a silence that has been in place for long enough that its breaking will itself carry weight before a single word of content has been exchanged. The fact of the reaching will say something, and what it will say is this: I have been awake. I have been holding something I should have said before now, and I am done managing the holding. Whatever the response is on your end, whatever this costs me, I am done being silent about what is true. That is the quality of what is approaching, not a casual reconnection, not someone who has found a convenient moment to be in touch. Someone who has arrived through sleepless hours and the relentless honesty of the 3 a.m. grammar at the place where reaching out is the only remaining option that the internal ledger will accept. Let me ask you something. In the quiet hours, in your own version of the 3 a.m. grammar, what is the thing you most want this person to say? Not the version you think is realistic, not the version you have reasoned yourself into as acceptable, the actual thing. The words, if you could write them yourself, that would finally make the weight of carrying this feel as though it had been worth carrying. I ask because what I am seeing in the approaching honesty is closer to that than you might expect, not identical to it. Real honesty is never exactly the version we have scripted in our private hours, but closer than you have perhaps allowed yourself to believe is possible. Tell me in the comments if something specific came to mind when I asked that. The thing you most want to hear, I want to know what the inside of this looks like from your position, because the reading is showing me two people with more parallel interior experience than either of them currently knows. There's a caution I want to offer here, and I want to offer it with care because it is not meant to diminish the significance of what is approaching, but to ensure you receive it in a way that actually serves you. Honesty, even genuine, hard-won, sleepless night produced honesty, is the beginning of something rather than the resolution of it. What this person is moving toward, the telling of what has been true and has not been said, that is a first step, an important one, a necessary one. The foundation without which nothing real can be built, but it is not the whole building. And I want you to hold that distinction when the honesty arrives. To receive it as what it is, which is a beginning, an opening, an act of finally showing up in a way that the situation has deserved for longer than it received, without immediately treating it as though it settles everything that preceded it. Some things that honesty opens will need time and conversation and the specific slow work of rebuilding trust that cannot be shortcut by a single act of disclosure, however genuine. You are allowed to receive the honesty fully and completely and still require more than the honesty alone to know what you want to do with it. Receiving does not obligate. Opening the door does not commit you to what lies beyond it before you have had the chance to see it clearly. Let me close with what I see when I look at the longer arc of this situation. The view from slightly further back than the immediate moment of approaching honesty. What I see is two people who have been, each in their own way and each at their own cost, carrying something that belongs in the space between them rather than inside either of them separately. That is what unexpressed truth does. It does not stay neatly contained in the person withholding it. It occupies the space of the connection, fills it with a particular quality of unresolved pressure that both people feel without always being able to name its source. The sleeplessness on their end, the carrying on yours, both are symptoms of the same thing. Something wanting to move from the interior of each of you into the shared space where it can actually be examined, understood, responded to. Words between two people, actual words, not the versions rehearsed privately or imagined or assumed, the spoken ones. That is what is coming. and what comes after it, what becomes possible in the space that is cleared by finally saying what has been true. That is what this reading cannot and should not fully describe, because it belongs to the two of you, to the specific, unrepeatable conversation that has been assembling itself in the sleepless hours of someone who finally knows it is time. What I can tell you is that the space on the other side of that conversation is more open than the space you are currently standing in. More honest, more real, and considerably lighter than what either of you have been carrying alone. The sleeplessness has done its work. The honesty is ready. And somewhere in the quiet hours of tonight or the nights immediately following, someone is going to reach for their phone or their courage or both. Be ready to receive what they bring, Virgo. Not with your guard up, not with your conclusions already formed, with the specific, rare, quietly courageous openness of someone who has also been awake, who also knows what it is to carry something in the 3am grammar, who understands from the inside what it costs to finally decide to say the true thing. Meet them there. In the honesty, that is where everything worth building between you actually begins. If this reading landed somewhere specific tonight, somewhere that felt less like content and more like company in a quiet hour, I want to hear about it. Leave something real in the comments. Not for me. For the version of you that needed to say it out loud somewhere, even here, even anonymously, even in a comment section, at whatever hour you found this, that version deserves to be heard. Until next time, Virgo, sleep when you can, and when you cannot, know that the wakefulness is working on something. It always is.